myself.
He did that and more with this cartoon. It showed incumbent President Jacob Zuma preparing to rape Lady Justice. Zaphira called it a metaphor for the abuse of justice that allowed Mr. Zuma to take office. But there was a little bit more to it than that.
Our sitting president was acquitted of rape charges under very controversial circumstances. A lot of people, myself included, were not very impressed with that verdict.
People within the ANC, including Zuma himself and a number of others who were saying that I was unfair to portray him as a rapist after he'd been acquitted. I am saying it is clearly metaphorical because the figure of Lady Justice is a metaphor.
But be that as it may, it is sailing very close to the wind for that very reason.
Mr. Zuma then sued Zaphira, which led to this on-air skirmish.
I am doing exactly what journalists and what cartoonists and what satirists do in democratic societies.
And I thought, well, I'll ambush him a little bit because, you know, he is suing me. And unfortunately, I got cut off when he made a statement which I thought was just grandstanding.
You are invading my own dignity.
But at least I got my say in and a lot of people heard.
Now, more than 2 years later, Zaphira has finally been issued with a court summons for the Lady Justice cartoon.
I hope it goes to courts in 2011 because I can't wait to see the president of the country having to explain how the cartoon that Jonathan did was irrelevant to what he had done before he became president of the country.
This whole case against Shapiro could set a very unfortunate precedent. You know, it will be satirists now, tomorrow it will be journalists, the next day it will be particular analysts, on and on and on. We're coming from this country where in the 80s people used to get the newspapers with big holes in them because the state felt that it was not in the public interest. We don't want to go back there.
Here's another technique Mr. Zuma doesn't like. Zaphira attaches a shower head to the president's head. It dates back to his rape trial when he admitted to having unprotected sex with an HIV-positive woman. To reduce the risk of infection, Zuma said he just took a shower.
It's a very strange statement from someone who had been the head of the National AIDS Council in South Africa. So I did a cartoon where the shower appeared on his head, and it actually said AIDS prevention.
For the next 3 years, every cartoon that featured Zuma featured the shower head. That changed in mid-2009, but only temporarily.
When he became president, I thought, well, let me give him a chance. And I did a cartoon where his critics are giving him a break and the shower is now suspended. So the shower just sort of lifted up and hovered in the air. When it was found that he had even more babies out of wedlock, he's married to 3 women, but these were even outside of those marriages. So, of course, the shower had to come back.
This time, it was bigger than ever. Throughout this period, Zaphira was planning a satirical venture not for print, for broadcast.
As my old friend Frankie used to say, start spreading the news.
He created a political puppet show called The News. Zaphira teamed up with a French producer, Thierry Cassuto, who moved to South Africa in 1998, 4 years into majority rule, and saw a satirical opportunity staring back at him.
I looked at the political field, the landscape, and I thought, wow, this is like a chessboard with so many different, very colorful characters. Having a quasi-saint like Nelson Mandela on the one hand, on the other hand, having a quasi-neo-Nazi like Eugene Terreblanche, and everything else in the middle.
The News was commissioned by the SABC, the country's state broadcaster. But when the SABC demanded editorial control, the deal fell apart.
There are certain tests that are best done behind closed doors.
Every broadcaster has got editorial policies that they've got to adhere to. You've got to make sure that whatever product you put on air adheres to your editorial policies. That is the editorial control we wanted. The producers wanted to project it as a political issue. Government is influencing it. But if that was the case, the other broadcasters in the country, they also rejected it. Therefore, what does that say?
None of the mainstream broadcasters were ready for our show. I think the people of South Africa are ready for ZA News, but the broadcasters were not ready. Our YouTube channel is the #1 YouTube channel in the country. Our fan page on Facebook is one of the biggest in the country as well.
17 years after the end of apartheid, race remains the defining social issue in South Africa, and that is reflected in the country's media, especially when two white men lampoon politicians who are predominantly black.
A lot of people have strong opinions about white people being the purveyors of news, the creators of information, the creators of stories about African people. And I think a lot of us have had enough of that.
Whether or not the composition of the team that produces the news has influenced whether, you know, the fact that we're not on TV is not certain, because in fact it's a very mixed group producing this show. I think it's more about the strength of our criticism and the fact that we don't want to be editorially controlled.
Jonathan Shapiro doesn't want to be anybody's puppet, which is why for now his colourful cast of political caricatures is spreading the news online.
More Global Village Voices now on satire and how it plays in South African media.
I think satire is hugely important in South African media. We're a country that jokes a lot, we laugh a lot, we like drama. It's one of the ways that we communicate. If the media is going to be relevant, I think satire is massively important. South Africans understand it, South Africans get it. We understand complex humour and we make use of it all the time.
Satire doesn't play as much of an important role as we'd like to think it does. It certainly doesn't play the same role and function as it did in the late 1980s, for example, during the dying days of apartheid. It doesn't have that intensity and focus. I think Zapiro is great. My only concern is that there's only Zapiro at the moment. There isn't that broad range of cartoonists and caricatures that we'd like to actually see, and that is a concern going into the future.
Finally, a couple of weeks back, we reported on the $315 million sale of Arianna Huffington's news website, the Huffington Post, to AOL. That's a lot of money, especially considering that the bulk of the Huffington Post's traffic goes there for aggregated material. That's content from other news websites that the Huffington Post simply directs its readers to. Judging from our web video of the week, the online political cartoonist Mark Fiore thinks Ms. Huffington's financial windfall is a pretty good return for a mere aggregator. We'll see you next time at the Listening Post.
Multi-millionaire media maven Arianna's Huffington Post is now a cool $315 million richer.
Fabulous, darling.
This journalista's jackpot is all thanks to the advent of aggregation. Or, look, here's some stuff I found on the web. Why pay for journalists to work when the work of journalists can pay you? If only they would have thought of this sooner.
Ernie Pyle here, reporting from my study, where I just discovered some neat links on the war and did a bang-up job of search engine optimization.
Extra, extra. Give us your work for free and we'll make millions. Blog all about it.
Agricopolis was a success, as aggregation was the new key to big bucks. Merger upon merger and links upon links until new aggregators began to aggregate aggregators. Website A used content from Site B in exchange for B getting eyeballs from A. Soon B realized it could do the same thing and gathered from Site C. But C was no dummy, and soon A through Z all did the same thing, until one day little Tommy was at school researching a report on journalism and democracy. Tommy turned to the web, clicked, and found an aggregate of links linking to nothing but aggregators' links of each other's aggregated links. Good night, little Tommy, and good link.
If you're a Nokia user, you can download AlJazeera's news widget from Nokia's Ovis store. The news widget, available on compatible Nokia devices, gives users quick and easy access to real-time news updates from Al Jazeera English. See the world in real time. Al Jazeera Mobile.
Malaysia has created amongst the world's greenest, most cost-efficient buildings and constructed the most futuristic Formula One racing circuits. Discover Malaysia's service excellence at the Malaysia Services Exhibition Abu Dhabi. Register with Martrade.
We do accept that there was very bad mistakes made in our banking area.
Behind the headlines,
most South Koreans are not interested in reunification.
Is the inside story at this time on Al Jazeera.
Unpopular with some at home, untested overseas. The first year has not been easy for David Cameron and his coalition government. In conjunction with U2, Al Jazeera asks your questions to the British Prime Minister. World View, an interview with David Cameron at this time on Al Jazeera.
March on Al Jazeera. In 2009, Al Jazeera visited the cities worst affected by the financial downturn. Now, 2 years later, we return as European leaders discuss the debt crisis.
In a new 8-part series, Al Jazeera looks at women's rights and maternal health. Real women and their personal stories.
It's 20 years since the Arab League held its annual summit in Iraq. An Al Jazeera news special has full coverage from Baghdad.
Branded a lunatic by some and an inspirational revolutionary by others, Al Jazeera follows the controversial Norman Finkelstein.
As protests, violence, and the call for political reform spreads across the Arab world, Al Jazeera's in-depth coverage of events on the ground brings you the news as it breaks. Ongoing coverage of the Libya uprising on Al Jazeera.
It's not over. Gaddafi rallies his supporters in Tripoli. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the capital, Gaddafi loyalists open fire on protesters and more Libyans die on the streets. Hello and welcome to Al Jazeera, live from Doha. I'm Taimur Nabili. Now, as the international community moves to slap sanctions on Gaddafi, his son has challenged the world to find any wrongdoing.
I personally urge the Europeans to send fact-finding mission to Libya as soon as possible, because we are not afraid of facts.
In Benghazi, people turn out on the streets demanding Gaddafi pay for shedding Libyan blood. And the evacuations continue. Foreigners flee Libya as the situation becomes ever more dangerous. Also on this program, Iraq's largest oil refinery is shut down. Officials blame unknown attackers armed with guns and bombs. Well, Libya's longtime ruler Muammar Gaddafi has made another defiant address, vowing that he will not step down. This in the face of growing support for the anti-government demonstrators both at home and abroad. There's now been a call for concrete action